Hello, my name is Dr. Cecelia GreeneBarr. I am the president of GreeneBarr Strategic Enterprises, and I am here today with Mr. Quintin Gray. This is going to be an extensive interview because Mr. Gray is incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to tariffs and trade. He, in fact, has been the executive board member of the 2020 Farmer Cooperative. In light of where we find ourselves today, we need to hear from Mr. Gray. Mr. Quintin Gray, I introduce you. Please start off by telling us why you find it so important to begin to have this forum where people discuss trades and tariffs.
Well, one of the main reasons is that I have been involved with trade and tariffs for more than 30 years. And as a Foreign Service officer with the Foreign Agricultural Service, helping U.S. small and medium-sized businesses resolve trade issues, and working with trade associations such as the Southern United States Trade Association, etc., helping U.S. companies the whole time. But one of the real reasons I wanted to start this forum is because I was hurt financially by the trade war in 2018. I have a Chinese American business partner. We had negotiated contracts to provide food safety training to Chinese companies. And then the trade war started. And all of those contracts went down the tube, which meaning the company said, we're not going to do this business with the US. And as we all know, at least in the agricultural sector, trade with China decreased by 50% during that time. And so when this talk of trade tariffs and trade wars restarted, I said, I know this personally. I was personally impacted by the last one. My background has been involved with trade and tariffs for many years. So there are a lot of companies out there and organizations that need to understand what this means for them. It will help the company to better position themselves to maneuver through the trade war. I don't say win, because there are no winners in a trade war. There are losers. But there are some losers who are more losers than others. And in the first round, I was a bigger loser because all the contracts we had negotiated just dried up.
You said a lot of things that have the wheels of my mind moving, starting with the word war. That is such an impactful word and a way to describe what I always see it as a negotiation. But when negotiations are perceived as wars and maneuvered as wars, that's really interesting. So when it comes to the forum that you are going to have and having, what do you hope to achieve from the forum in the context of what you describe as a war?
Well, I'm so happy you asked me this question, because most folks don't understand that actually trade has been taking place with the US back to the pre-19th century. And trade agreements were started way back in the 1800s, 1700s. There were always trade agreements to try to resolve trade disputes. And then after World War II, you had what was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is a series of trade negotiation rounds. And in those rounds, the US and other countries negotiated tariffs and negotiated agreements. Those negotiations went through 8 rounds, and a round could take 5 or 6 years. So it's not as if it was a one-off, so to speak. It was a series of negotiations over a period of time until an agreement was reached. So the GATT system was in place up until 1994, when the Uruguay round took place, And then at that time, the Uruguay round resulted in the World Trade Organization. And that Uruguay round was signed, actually, the agreement was signed in Marrakesh in 1994. But January 1, 1995 is when the new World Trade Organization was established, and was established to give um, countries and therefore companies a platform for resolving trade disputes. And the World Trade Organization is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. So there is a platform. There is 166 countries that are party to those negotiations, and it is a venue for the U.S. to carry trade disputes. That is on the big, I would say, high-level negotiations. But in addition to that, the U.S. government has the U.S. Trade Representative's Office. And the head of that office right now is Ambassador Jameson Greer. And Ambassador Jameson Greer was named to that position in February this year. So that office has about 200 professionals whose job it is to follow all trade agreements, to negotiate bilateral trade agreements, and to negotiate multilateral trade agreements. So the U.S. Trade Representative's Office is in charge of negotiating trade agreements. That's one of the reasons why I say war, because a war means that there are tariffs being implemented that are outside of those agreements. And when those tariffs are being implemented outside those agreements, then that starts a war, because one country says, okay, you're encroaching on my territory now by putting tariffs on my goods. And then the US, there's a tit for tat situation. And the reason why this is so important is because we are at war, trade war wise, with our biggest trading partners, Mexico and Canada and China are the big three. And US exports to those countries are in the billions of dollars. And in both cases, for Mexico and China, it's more than $300 billion a year that we export to those countries. They export a ton to us too. And we have a trade deficit, of course. We do have a trade deficit, especially with Mexico, but trade and with China. But the issue is that you have to balance out. If you're exporting, you're importing, you're trading, there are a lot of jobs in the US that are created by trade. And they are good paying jobs that US citizens hold. So there is an issue of whether or not the trade is actually hurting us more than it's helping us. But we are definitely when we get outside of the negotiated agreements, we're into a war footing. And that's the way Canada's looking at it. And that's the way Mexico's looking at it. And China's looking at it the same way. We're going back to the way it was so early part of this century in terms of how we negotiated trade agreements. We're outside of the structure of how it should be done. And that's one of the reasons why I found it so important that we have a venue for small to medium-sized companies to understand the issue, to see how they might protect themselves from the repercussions of the tariffs and counter tariffs that are going to take place.
Okay. You said a lot.
I know.
So
Always.
Absolutely. Clearly expert in this field. And my company, GreeneBarr Strategic Enterprises, I help small to medium-sized businesses and organizations to have the back office from a software perspective to excel in what they're doing. I am not one whose company participates, whose livelihood is based on trade. So my questions come as in the way I'm hearing what you're saying, and my questions come from one who is not in this field and who is not directly impacted by what you're saying, because I don't participate in trade as a business, but I have questions based on a couple of things that you said, and it leads right into some of the things that clearly you're qualified to lead this forum. And so I'm going to ask a couple of follow-up questions based on what you said. So you define this as a war because activities are being done that are outside of what has been negotiated. So the first thing that comes to my mind has to do with negotiations. A negotiation is only as strong as the negotiators, right? And so as an American citizen, as an American business person, the first question that comes to my mind has been the people who negotiated on behalf of America. If they did not negotiate a strong deal for America, we are already at a deficit. Second thing that you pointed out is that America has trade deficits. I'm taking that to mean, I don't know, asking, but I'm taking that to mean that we are paying more in tariffs for the things we ship out than the companies who are shipping into us. So partners, Canada, Mexico, and China are bringing their goods and services into our country at a much lower tariff than we are paying sending out. Is that what you mean by deficit?
No. But let me back before I explain that.
I didn't hear you. Is that what you mean by
The
deficit?
answer was no.
No. Okay, so what's
That's not what I meant. But let's go back a bit. Because
okay.
you said a lot this time. And what I want to say is that tariffs impact all businesses, including yours,
I said
because
directly though. I said directly. Like
directly,
what I
but I
mean is
say,
I don't buy and sell across waters. So that's what I mean by directly.
okay, you're correct, directly, but indirectly, you're impacted.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because I would guarantee you that even in your office right now, there are a ton of products come from China. And you turn around and you see a label said made in China. And that goes for almost everything in your office and in my office.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are directly impacted by the trade war. And the US agricultural sector exports, it used to be a couple of years ago, over $36 billion worth of agriculture products to China a year alone. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not speaking of other world partners, and a lot to Canada and a lot to Mexico. And we are tied together in some ways. And so let's say you're not directly impacted, but you are somewhat impacted by that. And so anything that you were to purchase, you would purchase going forward if this trade war continues, will be higher and the inflation rate will increase. That's not politics. That's just economics. So that means that if you're importing anything that comes from overseas, and if the tariffs are going to be applied as suggested, then what's going to happen is that the price of our products are going to go up. And companies need to understand that, especially companies that are just beginning to export. Oh my God, I can't believe how confused they will be, because they're going to be wondering, if 25% tariff is put on my product that I'm sending to Dubai, what is it going to do with my business? What is it going to do to my business? Or I'm importing certain amount of product into the United States, and that another tariff is going to be applied. How am I going to survive? Because let me tell you, in agriculture, and when I say agriculture, and I made this forum, making this forum for all businesses, because agriculture is, when you say trade, trade is trade. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you're trading an apple or oranges or whatever, or whether you're trading clothes, or whether you're trading computers, etc. Trade is trade, and the parameters and the issues that a company or organization deals with all are involved. They're all the same issues. So
Mhm.
tariffs is going to impact everybody, not only my little small consulting company, the way it did in 2018, is going to impact everybody. So you said a lot. So if I didn't answer something
Actually asking
specifically,
questions. I was actually
okay.
asking questions because, again, I am not the expert. I am not in the business of trading. So my questions were coming
Oh,
because
the deficit.
I wanted
Sorry.
to
I
understand.
remember now.
Yeah, I wanted to understand what you said. So I wasn't saying, because I am not the expert. You're the expert. But you
Yes.
mentioned a couple of things that started my wheels turning, and I wanted clarification because it came across in a way that I just needed to understand, particularly when you use the word war and when you mentioned the word deficit. And so that's where I was trying to understand what you were saying. And that's why I postured myself to say, I am not directly impacted because I am not a trader. I am a consumer of goods that come from other countries. And you're correct. There are many things in my office and in my home that were actually produced in another country. That makes me a consumer, indirectly impacted by the imbalance of trade. So I concede that. When you're talking about your upcoming forum and how it will work, let me just close out my last statement by saying this. You talked about trade in the billions with a B. In the
Billions
billions,
with a B. A big B.
billions with a B. And so I hear what you're saying, and I also seek to understand, because when you're talking B's and T's, billions and trillions, that is an avenue that I would say 75% of the population, Americans, have no real insight, wisdom, or experience. So that's the business of people who understand billions and trillions. That's not my playground. Okay. I can postulate about what I think it means, but I'm not an expert. That's not the playground I play in, billions and trillions. And when you're at that level, nothing is ever, straight and one point. And so that's why I was trying to get an understanding about the element of war, how this trade thing works. What does this mean in terms of deficit, America being at a deficit? What does it mean to have partners, especially if other nations are not fair? If we didn't have strong negotiators, all of this is the business of billions and trillions, for which I have no expertise. So that's why I was asking the question. And
Let me
I am
answer
sure.
those questions for you.
Okay.
You before you give me too many to handle at one time, let, let me answer the one about deficits first.
Okay.
First of all, a deficit is the value of US products. Let's use Mexico, for example, that's exported to Mexico, and the value of Mexican products that are exported to the United States.
Okay.
Right now, they're Mexico's exporting a lot more than what we're exporting to them. They're exporting more to us in
Mm-hmm.
value than we're
Mm-hmm.
exporting to them. So
Mm-hmm.
in the billions of dollars, we're running a deficit, a trade deficit with them because they are exporting more in terms of value to us than we are to them. That's what the deficits
That's
mean.
what that means. Okay.
That's what that means. Now, you
Okay.
asked the question about our negotiators. This is a really, really great question
Okay.
because there's such a thing called Trade Promotions Authority, which gives the US government the ability through the US Trade Representative's office to negotiate agreements with the approval of Congress. So the US Congress, so any trade agreement that the US government negotiates has to go through the U.S. Congress, has to be ratified by Congress. So
Okay.
that means that there's a check and a balance on any administration that wants to negotiate a trade agreement. So that authority is authority that Congress holds, and Congress is going to not approve an agreement that it believes is not going to be in the best interest of U.S. taxpayers and the jobs, job creation, etc. So there's a rigorous process that the U.S. industry goes through. And the U.S. Trade Representative's Office has about 200 people whose background, these people, I've worked with them in the past, they're steeped in trade. They understand trade probably better than I do, but they're really, really good at what they do in negotiating agreements. And as a part, whenever there was an agricultural agreement that involved the country where I worked, I was involved in the negotiations as a member of the USA team. To give you an example, and this is concerning the World Trade Organization, when Saudi Arabia was seeking to get to accede into the World Trade Organization, I was the agriculture counselor. My job title then was agricultural trade officer in Saudi Arabia for the U.S. Embassy. So I went to Geneva to the World Trade Organization meetings that Saudi Arabia had as an on-the-ground expert. I truth checked them when they said certain things. And by my being on the team, and that team was being led by the U.S. Trade Representative's staff and office. And so I was a part of that team. So I understand the process. So our negotiators are the best. We're the best negotiators. The U.S. has the best negotiators of any country in the world. And I can say that without even blinking an eye. And so when it comes time to negotiation, you have the USTR staff and the USTR, U.S. Trade Representative. They are there to put the agreements together. The agreements are approved by Congress, but in certain cases, especially when it came to accessions to the World Trade Organization, they brought in technical experts who knew the subject matter the best. And then they had people such as myself to ground truth them, because folks will tell you anything, but if you are there in the country living and working, you know the real situation as a U.S. citizen and as a person who's looking out for the U.S. interest.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You want to know what pops into my mind? And you're going to talk about, and I want you to talk about how you see the forum working, because you probably are going to have people come to the forum who are novice like myself. So maybe I feel like I'm asking questions that they may ask. And I want you to talk about, as we close this out, how you see your trade and tariffs forum, how you see it playing out, how you see it working, how you're structuring it. We want to know all of that. But I guess in response to what I heard you say, there's only one question that comes to mind. I understand that what you said was that the people who have negotiated for America are incredibly knowledgeable. They know truth, they know product, they know the system. Knowledge and strength are not the same thing. So with that, it leaves me with one huge question. If with the most informed, best informed, most knowledgeable team of negotiators in the world, how then has America found itself in the position we are the strongest, prosperous, number one nation in the world? Everybody comes to us. But how is it that we are at a deficit? We pay more in trade, we pay more to support everybody. How did we come out at a deficit with Canada, China, and Mexico? How did America come out at a deficit time after time? And yet we have the strongest team of negotiators. Those two, for this novice, I can't quite seem to put those together. How did these weaker nations with inferior negotiators get more out of the deal than America? Don't answer. Save it for your people. So tell me.
No, 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 no.
Tell me how the forum is going
I
to work.
have to answer that question because it's sort of a misconception as to the U.S.'s strength and the U.S.'s position in the world.
Oh,
Now, you think of you. I only talked about Mexico and China. The idea of, let's say, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA,
okay.
which was created to be a counterbalance for USA, Mexico, and Canada to be a counterbalance to the European Union.
Okay.
That was the purpose. We were supposed to be viewed as a collective of three powerful countries working together.
Okay.
The idea of NAFTA was to reduce tariffs over 15 years to zero. And we wouldn't have tariffs between ourselves. We place tariffs on other folks. So when you look at the US of A and Canada and Mexico, you, as trade is concerned, you should think of a block of countries that have worked together to be counterbalance to the European Union, to China, to other trade blocs that have organized over the years. So if you were to take the US, Mexico, and China as an entity, as a unit, the way it should be taken, then we are stronger because of our trade agreements, because all three countries have benefited from them. Now, where do we have the surpluses? Like I said, there are 166 countries in the World Trade Organization. With many of those countries, we're in surplus with them and not in deficit. Now, not in, when you talk about the US, China, and Mexico, we're partners. Let's say if an automobile is made in the United States, parts come from Mexico, parts come from China. It's all interrelated. You can't separate them out. Parts can go between the three countries 2 or 3 times before you ride in the car. So even though the car might have a component that's made in Mexico, it may have aluminum or whatever that comes from Canada. And that goes down to what we call in economics comparative advantage. Some places can produce stuff cheaper and better than we can. We can produce certain things cheaper and better than they can. And so as a unit, the US, Mexico, and Canada, we have figured out who can do what the best to come out with products that will come out of our region, that will compete against China, that will compete against the European Union. We figured it out. Now, with the current trade environment, that plan as a unit that is so crucial for us three, all three of us, our countries, to be competitive. If we don't work together as a unit, then we're going to see ourselves getting knocked out by other trade blocs. So this is a serious issue and it's very important. But we're not losing here. But we're going to lose soon if we don't be careful. But we're not losing now.
Okay, so when you say my understanding about America is a little off, is because I wasn't seeing it as a block. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, so when I see it as a block, and Canada and Mexico are my partners, then should I still be at a deficit with my partners? Number one. And number two, should my partners, because the way I understand it, and I think the people who are going to come to the forum will be looking for you to have the insight and wisdom, et cetera, that I'm curious about. If my partners you have this lane here is the trade lane. This lane over here is a different lane. Okay, let's call this lane a tax. Okay, so if my partners are permitting things that will attack the good of my nation, to undermine the well-being of my citizens, and I say to my partners, stop it on your side, and they say no, and I say, well, if you don't stop it on your side, I'm going to impose things that will hurt you to motivate you to stop being a bad partner. If you do things to hurt me indirectly by being lax in some area, that's not a good partner. Like in marriage, if your partner in marriage is doing things to undermine you, that's not a good union. And so I understand now when you're talking about the bloc, Mexico, Canada, and America. I understand the bloc, okay. But I also have a sense of, well, if we're partners, look out for me. A partner looks out for you, not just in one lane. It's that, 4 flat tires down. That's a real partner. That's just my thinking. And
can I respond to that? Because I know you were saying you want me to go over the farm. This is so good that we're going back and forth. Now, let me see if I can be clear on what I mean. There's a venue set up under trade agreements, under U.S.-Mexico-China, U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement for dispute resolution. There's a formal process for that. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so, the U.S. should be fighting for every advantage, no doubt about it. But the U.S. economy depends largely on Canada and Mexico for a lot of what we produce here. So we're going to, I know the ultimate aim, not getting into politics, but the ultimate aim is to bring production back to the United States. All well and good. Nobody's disputing that. That's a good thing. But how you do it matters. So what happens is, as you have noted, Canada is looking at the US and saying, you're not good partner with us. We are selling you, we're buying your products. Canada is by far, if not the largest, one of the largest importers of US ag products, and they export a ton to the United States. So we are large trading partners, and the same with Mexico. So they're saying, we just negotiated an agreement with you literally less than 5 years ago, which everybody held as the US MCA agreement. And everybody's saying it's such a great agreement. It's bipartisan support because it improved trade conditions. It took into account intellectual property rights. It also took into account digital trade. It gave protection that helped the US to get more higher paying jobs as a result of the trade agreement. Everybody involved and in Congress involved overwhelmingly supported this agreement just less than 5 years ago. And here we are. We want to get changes, but do it in a most disruptive way possible. Because they're looking at us the way we look at them. When they see a tariff or whatever, and we see a tariff and we say, that's unfair. They're looking at us the same way. They're saying, if you impose the tariff, I'm going to impose the tariff. So we're going into, using the analogy of a marriage, we're going into a bad marriage where there's going to be fighting all over the place. And so what I want to do, along with the 2020 Farmers Cooperative, is to provide a platform, a forum for small to medium-sized companies to have a place to talk, to have a place to understand, to have a place to get answers to their questions like the ones you asked me. And I have the knowledge, but I'm not going to be the only person who's going to be talking on these forums. I'm going to invite other trade people, people who are involved with trade issues, to come and be invited guests. So I'm not going to hog the whole time. I'm going to make certain that the appropriate experts are coming in. Now I know, I'm pretty much like you said, I'm an expert at this area, but I know other people who are as well. So the idea of the forum is to have a venue that will be about an hour, hour and a half, 4 times a year, which would be a quarterly forum. And in that forum, the first 10 to 15 minutes, I will take, at least for the first forum, I'll take 10 to 15 minutes, give a PowerPoint on what the current trade issues are. I will talk about them. Then I would take another 10 minutes to talk about what impact those trade issues are going to have on your businesses. What's the impact? And then I will open the floor up for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes for anybody on the call who wants to ask questions. This is going to be a safe place for people coming. So there'll be rules in terms of, we're not going to be, shouting insults to anybody, because I'll cut that off right away. We're going to have constructive
Surely that would
conversation.
not happen. Surely.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. So we're going to have constructive conversation. You're going to walk away saying, I know more about trade than I knew before. I know how we've gotten to this situation. I know the dangers that we are in when we're in this situation, because history teaches us a lot. We're not the first. This is not the first time the U.S. is going through like a trade war footing. We've done this before in tariffs. The stock market crash of 1929 was during a time when we were imposing high tariffs to protect our U.S. farmers. So we've gone through this before. So the scenario is eerily similar. So we have to be very careful. So the forum will be for an hour and a half. You will have 3 ways to join, or the subscribers will have 3 ways to join. You will have a basic plan, which is $25 a forum. Those are for people who want to try it out. They don't know about this Quintin Gray. They want to try it out, but they don't want to commit to the 4 forums. And the 4 forums is $75, which is a subscription fee. And you see there's a big 25% discount if you go for the 4 forums. And then there will be an opportunity for for subscribers to become sponsors. A sponsor is somebody who say, I really think that this is a great idea, and that believe that companies need this, and this is going to be a good forum for them to learn of these issues, etc. And they may want to donate a little more. A bronze member, $100, a silver member, $150, a gold member would be $200. These amounts of money, it's not their money that's the most important thing, is what you will gain as an organization or company, or that is the most important part, because the money is just a nominal fee to cover costs. That's all for the most part. But that is it, more or less, is what I'm hoping to achieve. I've gotten a lot of interest, folks. At least they're talking the right talk, that they want to join this. So we'll see what happens when we launch in a few days.
Well, I have enjoyed this conversation. I am grateful that you are one of my clients, one of my customers with GreeneBarr Strategic Enterprises. I applaud the depth of your expertise in this area and your willingness to help people prepare themselves for what is taking place with our block and the other blocks. See, I learned something today, the blocks. And I'm really grateful for those who will take advantage of what you're offering, and they will come and to be a part of these forums where they can have conversations. I'm sure some questions that I raise, people will come to the forum with those same types of questions, and they will get good dialogue from you and the other experts that you will have there. Again, this thing about trade is the work of billions and trillions. And the majority of the American population doesn't function in billions and the business of billions and trillions. So to be able to have a place to come and ask questions is very valuable. So I salute you on that. And me being the person who I am, my undergraduate concentration was in manufacturing, and being a resident of North Carolina and seeing how the economy shifted, particularly in terms of manufacturing, I can say with great enthusiasm, it is good to know that companies have made commitments to bring manufacturing to America. When I lived in Michigan for a couple of decades and I saw how the big three, how their plants were deteriorating, and yet they were taking their profits to one of the partners and building technologically advanced plants outside of our borders, while what was inside of our borders were deteriorating every day. It made my manufacturing heart sad. So now that companies are pledging to come to America and build manufacturing, the manufacturing inside of me is incredibly happy and optimistic for our national economy. I am incredibly optimistic. Is it a chaotic right now? Yes, but okay, past the chaos, I feel optimistic for us, and I'm glad you are going to be present to help people navigate these waters with a sense of optimism for their own business and for our nation. So thank you so very much for what you're doing for businesses and economies. I salute you, sir.
Thank you so much. Very insightful interview. Thank you.
You're
Take
welcome.
care.
Bye-bye.